Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am attorney Ito Makoto, the director of Itojuku. Today, we will be talking about what is a constitution and discuss the current move to amend the Japanese Constitution and what this means. In particular, we will be talking about the constitutional amendments draft proposed by the Liberal Democratic Party, LDP. I would like us to ponder about these matters during the discussion. As we discuss about the current Japanese Constitution, what kind of concepts it guarantees, what values it protects, and the purpose that it serves, I would like us to ponder about the issues surrounding the proposed constitutional amendment. The Japanese Constitution, through its Article 9, actively renounces war and promotes the value of pacifism. As we discuss, I would like us to think about what this means. Finally, in connection with the One Person, One Vote campaign, which I am a part of, I would like us to think about what the constitutional amendments mean to the realization of this campaign. Let us begin. Please refer to the PowerPoint slides as you listen to the discussion. Now, before we start, let me first share with you a brief introduction. Itojuku has been involved in the business of training individuals for the Japanese bar exam and the civil service exam. It is my belief that lawyers and civil servants play an important role in the realization of the ideals guaranteed by the Japanese Constitution. And for 30 years, I have been committed in educating future lawyers and civil servants who are capable of realizing this role. This photo is taken from my class held at the Itojuku Tokyo School in Shibuya. Recently, more and more students are taking courses online, which makes my courses accessible anywhere via the internet. It is my dream that more people could gain an understanding of the Japanese Constitution, so I give about 100 lectures, this year 150 lectures, a year around the country to realize this. Also, I have authored books on the topic of the Japanese Constitution, such as The Guide to Constitution, Constitutional Power, Understanding the Constitution for junior and senior high school students, What the Constitution Teaches Us. I would appreciate if my books were read. Now then, let us start discussing about what is the reason for being of the Constitution. Every one of us follows the law, but why exactly do we follow it? Some of us may say that the law is right, so we follow it, but why is the law right? The answer is because the law reflects the view of the majority of the people within a certain territory during a certain period of time. Since Japan is currently a democratic country where the sovereignty of the people is recognized, laws that are created from the opinion of the sovereign Japanese people are correct. Before, the argument on whether the law is right or not is different. Before, a law is right because the emperor decreed it. Similarly, in other countries, a law will be right if it was decreed by their king. This happens in countries under the rule of an emperor or a king. The question now is that, are laws that arose from the opinion of the majority always right? Sadly, the answer is no. As humans, we can be vulnerable to manipulation of information, our judgments can be clouded by our environment, mood, or immediate interests. As humans, we commit errors. In other words, human beings are not perfect and can commit mistakes. Even if the majority of people agreed to give their consent over something at one point, when you put that decision under scrutiny again after some time, it might turn out to be a mistake. This experience can be seen in the human race in many places. One famous example is Nazi Germany during Hitler's era. During that era, German citizens enthusiastically supported Hitler's cause. As we all know, behind Hitler's rule is the massacre of Jewish people and other cruel things, but he received great support from the German citizens at that time. And then in 2003, the Bush administration declared war against Iraq. During that time, Bush garnered great support from American citizens. What was the reason for that war? It was because weapons of mass destruction are hidden in Iraq and that it has connections with the terrorist groups. Because of this, they claim that there is no choice but to attack and defeat the then-President Saddam Hussein. However, after studying the events again, they found that all the claims used by the then Bush administration were all lies, and many people supported this war based on lies. This fact is also true with Japan. In the last war, people believed false information announced by the imperial headquarters, which said that Japan continues to win its war for justice. Fooling the people and the mass media, Japan continued to send soldiers. Regardless of race and beyond generations, human beings unfortunately err. Humans are weak and imperfect beings. It is important to be governed by the voice of the majority from time to time. But since we already established that the opinion of the majority is not always right, there is a need to hold the brakes to examine it. Also, there are values that we cannot be deprived of regardless of the majority opinion. These values include human rights and peace, which are protected under the Constitution. Even if the law is created by the majority of the people, it cannot disregard the values protected under the Constitution. Even if the majority calls for it, there shall be no law that violates human rights. Even if the public clamors for war, the constitutional guarantee for the protection of peace cannot be abridged. This is the Japanese Constitution, which was written when times were calm. The idea to put constitutional restraints on the use of the power is called constitutionalism. Historically, the idea of constitutionalism was devised when the people and nobility of England thought of how they can protect their rights and privileges from the tyrannical rule of the King of England. Now that we are in a democracy, it is no longer the king whose power must be restrained, but also the government we have established based on democratic powers. Having a democracy does not merit rejoicing, for it also commits mistakes now and then. Because of this, democracy also needs to be examined through the Constitution. This is what constitutionalism means. Therefore, the idea behind constitutionalism is to establish a check and balance, even on a political body that represents the people. This is the meaning of constitutionalism in our modern times. Japan is a country that upholds both democracy and constitutionalism at the same time. The law is created by the state to put limits on the freedom of the people in order to maintain public order. The Constitution, on the other hand, put limits on the powers of the government in order to protect the freedom of the people. The law and the Constitution are completely opposite. In simple terms, the two has different answers on the question of who it protects. The law tells the people to obey the rule of law, while the Constitution tells the state to protect the people. The Constitution is the tool to restrict the state. The state holds power that is artificially made as a country. The idea of the state does not include culture, history, and traditions. Culture, history, and tradition, along with the concept of mother country, borders, the mountains, rivers, and nature, are not included in the idea of the state. In English, motherland equates to the word country, while government means the state. This is why the role of the Constitution to restrict the power of the state is important. That is why history, culture, and traditions are not included in the Constitution. It is not the role of the Constitution to include them. Why then are they not included in the Constitution? It is because these concepts vary according to each individual. Once you assign a constitutionality-accepted culture or history, it will cause the exclusion of certain individuals who thinks differently. This is why the inclusion of these types of values is not included in the Constitution. On the other hand, the common points among people, regardless of beliefs, their commonalities as human beings, their human rights, these are protected by the Constitution. In order to protect the human rights common among all people, the Constitution restrains the powers of the state. I am currently talking to you about these ideas now, but when I was in my mid-20s, I thought that the mother of all laws is the Constitution, and that it is the most fundamental law that we must observe. But it was a grave mistake on my part. Of course, now, I know that we as citizens have no duty to protect the Constitution. We are the ones being protected by the Constitution and not the other way around. To put things into perspective again, the Constitution restrains the state in order to protect our rights as citizens. Now we move on to the significance of the Constitution. The Constitution protects the rights and freedoms of the people by restraining state power. The Constitution's goal is to protect human rights. To put things into perspective, the law restrains the freedom of the people in order to maintain public order. It serves as a check on the citizens. The Constitution, on the other hand, restrains the power of the state. Thus, the Constitution naturally exists for the protection of human rights. If there are a lot of duties for the citizens included within the Constitution of a country, then it shall lose its essence as a constitution. To impose the people's duty is the purpose of laws, and to ensure that such laws do not impede on the human rights of citizens is the task of the Constitution. There are 3 duties specified in our Constitution. These 3 are the duty to pay taxes, the obligation of parents to educate their children, and the duty to work. Among these 3, I believe that the duty to pay taxes is the one most resembling an obligation. The duty to pay tax does not really need to be included in the Constitution. Countries that include the duty to pay tax in their constitution are Russia, China, South Korea, Japan, Italy, and Spain. This duty is not included in the constitutions of US, Great Britain, France, and Germany because this is supposed to be the duty of the law. The role of the Constitution is to preserve human rights. If you include a lot of duties for the citizens in the Constitution, it will lose its essence. In the proposed constitutional amendments by the LDP, in addition to the 3 duties already included in the current Constitution, they are proposing 10 new ones. This includes obligation to defend our country, obligation to respect flag of the rising sun and Kimigayo, obligation to secure the territory and resources, and obligation to obey public benefit or order. Simply, this means that the Constitution's role will change into a tool to restrict the people. In opposition, their proposal hardly includes new human rights. This means a denial of the constitutionalism. If we compare to our previous definition, the Constitution's purpose will now be to restrain the people. This clearly is a violation of the Article 99 of the current Constitution, which states that the Emperor or the Regent, as well as ministers of state, members of the Diet, judges, and all other public officials, have the obligation to respect and uphold this Constitution. Originally, the people have no duty to protect the Constitution. To uphold the Constitution is the duty of our public officials. If we take a look at the Article 102 of the LDP proposed constitutional amendments, it says that all the people should respect this Constitution. If we analyze the wording, it obligates the people to protect the Constitution. If this proposed revision gets passed, the people will be obligated by the state to follow the 10 duties included in the Constitution. Aside from that, Article 102 of the LDP proposed constitutional revision states that members of the Diet, the Minister of State, judges, and all other public officials have the obligation to uphold this Constitution. From this, it is obvious that the word emperor and regent used in the previous constitution is removed, which means that the regent or emperor is exempted from the duty to uphold the constitution. They could have the position to be above the constitution. This poses serious problems. Without doubt, this could mean that the Constitution will not differ with the law, as they both will exist to restrict citizens. The Constitution will no longer be the Constitution, but the law. From a constitution that protects the people from abuse of power by the state into a constitution that restricts the rights and freedoms of the citizens. This is a terrible thing. This is one of the most problematic issues with the LDP proposal. The preamble of the proposed revision begins with stating that Japan has a long history, own culture, and an emperor, symbol of the unity of the people over us. It also says that our country has overcome devastation from the last war and from the many disasters and developed. Our country has an important position in the international society now. From the phrasing, you will notice that it is filled with self-praise and pride. The people do not appear in the preamble until the third paragraph, which says, Japanese people having pride and strong will should defend the state and home by themselves, which signifies the citizens' duty of national defense. In continuation, it says that people should respect fundamental human rights, which assigns to the citizens the task of the state to uphold human rights. And then it continues to say that value harmony and the family and society should help each other in building the state. Then in the fourth paragraph of the preamble, it goes on starting with the word we, stating that we respect freedom and the rule of law, protect the beautiful territory and nature, promote education and technology, and develop the country through vital economic activity. Analyzing this, it is clear that it asks the citizens to develop the country. And in the final paragraph, it says, the Japanese people shall establish this law and hand it down, our heritage and our country, to children forever. This clearly obligates the citizens to pass traditions down to the children. It asks not to pass down the promotion of human rights and of peace. From the proposed provisions, it is obvious that it is the state that is placed in the heart of the Constitution. The state was given more importance than the happiness of the people, more than the safety of the people. If we go back to the original definition of the Constitution, we know that it exists to protect the rights and freedoms of the people from the abuse of power by the state. To put it simply, the Constitution exists to protect the minority, the weak, from the majority, the powerful. The current Constitution of Japan assures that nothing unjust will be done to the weak by the powerful. In our daily lives, there exists powerful people and weak people. The Constitution exists so that the powerful do not commit unjust abuses on the weak. Power has various types such as violent force, financial power, corporation, social status, expertise. The Constitution can be a tool to protect us from such powers. If you feel that something is unfair, remember that the Constitution exists to protect you. There are many examples that show the relation between the powerful and the weak, such as between a large company and an employee who was unfairly fired, a contractor and a subcontractor, a moneylender and an ordinary citizen. The Constitution defends the weak from the unfair use of power by the powerful. Excuse me, but let me just take off my coat. Now, if we think about that definition, we realize that there are important points you should consider when thinking about the Constitution. One of these points is imagination. Putting your imagination to work is the most important. The imagination to understand from the majority perspective and the minority perspective. The imagination to realize that the positions of the majority and the minority can interchange. The imagination that humans have both weak points and strong points. To put it simply, imagination is to have sympathy towards the other person. In truth, this is the most important point to consider in understanding the Constitution. For example, we have the Futenma military base issue or the nuclear power plant problem. In considering these issues, I am included in the majority, while the people of Okinawa, the people living near the nuclear power plants, they are the minority. The majority live their lives at the expense of the minority. Professor Tetsuya Takahashi criticized this setup as strange. This thinking that we are living at the expense of the weak is really not understandable. The majority should use their imagination to emphasize with the minority. This is really important. Also, although now you might be in the position of the majority, you don't know when the time comes that you will become part of the minority. Your company might get bankrupt. Right now, I'm speaking in front of you all in a loud voice, but when I get older, I will be needing nursing. A child who is differently abled might be born in my family. We do not know what will happen, so we are all of equal status in some sense. There are weak members and strong members in anyone. As a Japanese, you might be part of the majority in Japan, but if you are in poor health, then you are part of the minority. As a civil servant, you are in a stronger position, but if there comes a rule to reduce the labor costs or limit the number of civil servants, then as a laborer, you are placed on the weak position. In everyone, there's a strong point and a weak point. This is why putting our imaginations to work is the most important point to consider in understanding the Constitution. The Japanese Constitution protects a fundamental value. This value is the respect for individuals. All people should live with dignity and with respect of individuals, which in plain term means to value each individual. Each person is valuable. Everyone is the same. Everyone should be valued as human beings. However, each individual also differs. Firstly, everyone as human beings has the right to live. The state exists for each individual. It is not the individuals who exist for the state. Before the war, people believed in the idea that it is honorable to go to war for the country. This idea was enforced, and a lot of young lives perished. The value to respect each individual exists in order to end this thinking. Everyone should recognize that the life of each person has immeasurable value. And now we go on to the next idea, which is the recognition that each person is different. The fact that each one has their own individuality is wonderful. Just thinking about how different people are living together and accepting each other's diversity. People of different race, religion, and, of course, gender and beliefs living in peaceful coexistence are the society that we want to create. To summarize, everyone are the same, the rich and the poor, the handicapped, regardless of race, religion, or gender. Everyone are human beings. At the same time, no individual is the same. Each person has their own individuality and immeasurable value as an individual. To respect the dignity of a person and their individuality is the core ideal of respecting an individual. The value of respecting each individual is the most fundamental value protected by the Japanese Constitution. Some of you may ask, Are not the three major principles of respecting basic human rights, upholding the democratic sovereignty of the people, and ensuring pacifism and the renunciation of war the fundamental values protected under the Constitution? Yes, they are, but if we think about it all, these three are already included within the value of respecting individuals. To respect each individual and human dignity is to respect that person's human rights. Each individual's opinion is important, and to collect the voices of everyone is to practice a government with democratic sovereignty. War destroys the humanity of people, and so to renounce war is to respect individuals. The idea of respecting individuals is at the center of the three principles of respecting basic human rights, upholding the democratic sovereignty of the people, and the renunciation of war. Because of this, Article 13 serves as the most fundamental value of the Japanese Constitution. On the contrary, the proposed constitutional amendments of the LDP omitted the value of respecting individuals. Their proposed revision states that all citizens will be respected as individuals. If we scrutinize the wording in the proposal, we can see that it does not speak of a tangible person. Rather, it describes an abstract concept of an individual. This definition categorizes individuals into one collective unit without recognition of their individuality. Therefore, instead of respecting individuals, the proposed amendment puts more value to people as a collective, family, area, society, and state. This definition denies the idea of different individuals peacefully coexisting together and treats people as only one homogeneous unit. The life of each and every person has value beyond measure. Once the definition changes into an abstract idea of an individual, people will be put in the dangerous position of being valued in the same level as things, the same as consumable goods. In times of war, questions like how many soldiers died, how much ammunition will be needed, how much military power should we use? People's lives are treated like consumable goods, like bullets. Treating individuals as abstract concepts is the same thing. It recognizes people as a unit, but not the individual lives within that unit. If war comes and hundreds of people, thousands, or even tens of thousands of people die, it will be seen as unavoidable. In order to protect the state, such sacrifices will be seen as unavoidable. This definition is unacceptable. To respect individuals is clearly the essence of a modern constitution. Now, regarding human rights, the LDP proposed amendments included this statement in the Article 12. Awareness that freedoms and rights should be accompanied by responsibility and duty, and to never go against public interest and public order at all times. If we analyze this phrasing, public interest and public order are placed above human rights at all times. It used the word at all times and is vague on what public interest and public order means. We may think that this means social order, but closer scrutiny suggests otherwise. Public interest means the interest of the state, and public order is the state-determined definition of what order is and should be. For example, if the state decides to advance the use of nuclear power in the country, the people who oppose such action of the state will be seen as disrupting public order. To put a state-sponsored definition of public interest and public order in a higher position than human rights is an outrageous idea. This will be a backward move into the Meiji Constitution era. During that era, in order to maintain peace and order, a lot of limits were placed on human rights. In continuation, let's take a look at the insertion proposed by the LDP in Article 21. If you look at the highlighted portion, it states that activities that causes the disruption of public interest and public order are not permitted. If a politician decides to create a defense policy or a military policy and some citizens made protests against the policy, then it can be considered as a disruption of public order. The implementation of these amendments can lead to a very strict society. Moreover, in the Article 3, National Flag and the National Anthem of the proposed constitutional revision by the LDP, it states that Japan's national flag will be the Rising Sun flag, and the national anthem the Kimigayo. All citizens must respect these national symbols. If we go back to what we discussed at the beginning of the imposition of a specific culture, history, and tradition in the Constitution is not the purpose of the Constitution. There are varied opinions regarding the Rising Sun flag and the Kimigayo among the Japanese people. The existence of diverse opinions is a characteristic of a free society. There are many more questionable proposals in the constitutional revision draft by the LDP. This includes Article 15 and 94, denying the right to vote of foreigners, which entirely denies the right to suffrage of foreigners. The Article 20, permission of exceptions to the separation of the church and the state, which could open the possibility of the Prime Minister having official visits to the Yasukuni Shrine in a grand manner. Article 22, deletion of the regulation on the free enterprise, might be difficult to understand at first, but simply put, in order to remedy the disparities of the law, puts limits on the power of the stronger party. What the Article 22 does is that, for example, a large-scale supermarket wants to expand to other regions. In order to protect local businesses, a current provision limits the extent of power held by powerful corporations. This provision, however, is deleted on the proposed amendment. Article 24, duties of a family, questionably includes insertions related to morality and ethics. In this article, it states that families must help their relatives who are in need. The LDP puts this article just before the article of the right to live. This could excuse the state from its responsibility to provide welfare to citizens, as those who seek welfare could be told to ask their families first for help. Also, this amendment allows the possibility of advancing a state-determined definition of a family, in which those who fit the definition gets better treatment on the tax system. Japanese society today has families with different compositions. There are families of married couples, and there are families with unmarried couples living together. There are families composed of same-sex partners, single-parent families, and families with international marriages. Diversity of lifestyles is recognized by the current Japanese constitution. The proposed amendment, on the other hand, resembles the pre-war definition of a family. In addition, the pre-war definition considers Japan as one big household with the emperor as patriarch of the house, and everybody else are below him. Article 25, Paragraph 3, Protection of Japanese Living Abroad, talks about the protection of Japanese people living abroad. If we go back to history, we see that a lot of wars waged during the Meiji era were made in the name of protecting Japanese people living abroad. Such was the case in the sending of troops to Shandong and the Shanghai incident. The Article 25, Paragraph 4, Treatment of Crime Victims, contradicts with the existence of the criminal procedures. Also, the Article 28, Limits to the fundamental labor rights of civil servants, poses some questions as well. Considering all these factors, it is clear that the proposed constitutional amendment puts great limits on human rights. Policies made by the state must be followed, however stifling they may be. Citizens who fit within the framework set by the state are accepted, while the human rights of those who are at odds with the state are not recognized. It is sad that each year the number of casualties due to war are increasing. When the Second World War ended, we thought that it is the end of wars, but different wars still continue. Even as we speak, wars are happening in different parts of the world. Japan has renounced all forms of war. The Article 9, Paragraph 2 is especially important. This is written in the Article 9 of the current Constitution, which states that land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained, and that the right of belligerency of the state will not be recognized. Though I have a different opinion, our government thinks that as a right to self-defense, the country needs to maintain a military unit for defense. Still, the government cannot exercise the right to self-defense, nor can they use military abroad. The Article 9 protects also the lives of the Self-Defense Force members. In order to understand the Article 9, we should put in mind its two main points: the non-maintenance of military power and the non-recognition of the country's right to belligerency. In addition, the Preamble of the Constitution also talks about the right to peaceful existence, free from fear and want, of the people the world over, not just of the Japanese people, but the international society as well. By carrying out this positive role, we could contribute in the elimination of the different cases of structural violence, such as hunger, poverty, human rights infringement, discrimination, and environmental destruction. All over the world, many people still experience these forms of structural violence. We in Japan, through our Constitution, are contributing to the international society by committing to achieve security and peace and disengaging from actions that could trigger international conflicts. Clearly, military power does not equate as a contribution to international society. There are other ways of helping other countries, such as sending aid support to countries in need. But in the proposed constitutional revision by the LDP, the section in the preamble that ensures the right to a peaceful existence is deleted. At the same time, sections in the Article 9 which ensures Japan's non-maintenance of military power, non-recognition of the country's right to belligerency, and the refrain from creating a defense force are all omitted. On one hand, some people ask, what if North Korea attacks us? What about the territorial conflicts over the Senkaku Islands? If we consider these, is not the maintenance of a defense force important? If we are attacked, what will we do? These questions are frequently raised by groups who are in favor of changing the current constitution in order to protect our country, in order to protect our citizens, in order to protect our property. They say that creating a defense force is needed. You may have heard of such arguments already. Now, everyone, if you are asked, what are we to do if we are attacked? How do we answer such a question? Personally, I believe in unarmed neutrality, but what is being problematized by the LDP revision is not a national security policy, in which the current self-defense force covers, but the creation of a military nation. Please understand this thoroughly. If you are watching this DVD, you must be an advocate of unarmed neutrality who carries the belief of non-maintenance of military power, non-recognition of the country's right to belligerency, and the refrain from creating a defense force. And I believe that there are a lot of people who carry this belief. Right now, what is important is that we do not allow the revision of the Article 9 and the Constitution. Going back to the argument about defending the country from attacks, the revision does not talk about unarmed neutrality, but of a national security policy that could lead to Japan becoming a military country. There is a need to prevent Japan into becoming a typical military country. And so, if we are asked in the future how Japan could manage if it were attacked, we must point out that the current self-defense force of Japan already exists for that concern. The current self-defense force is the agency that handles the minimum essentials needed to protect the current. If we cannot be protected by the self-defense force, what are we to do? The thought of the current self-defense force not able to protect the country is a bit strange. Our current politicians believe that the self-defense force can have everything that is necessary to ensure that the minimum essentials to protect the country are met. To put it simply, even the creation of a small nuclear bomb is permissible, according to the interpretation of our politicians, in the name of defending the country. Because of this, the argument that the current self-defense force cannot sufficiently protect the country is questionable. If our current self-defense force cannot live up to the task of defending the country, then clearly we have wasted trillions of our government budget for it. For what purpose does our self-defense force exist if not to protect our country? We already have this agency to carry out the minimum essentials for the country's defense. That is to say, if you're arguing about the need for a defense security policy, then our current system already has a remedy for that. To argue that a national defense force is needed in order to protect the country from attacks is a deceptive claim. If our current system is insufficient, then for what reason does a non-performing agency exist for? For what reason do we allocate trillions of taxpayers' money for it? It is clear that the proposal to create a national defense force serves a different purpose. The rationale for the creation of a national defense force consists of 2 points. The first point is the issue collective self-defense in particular, Japan's ally status with the U.S. As Japan's ally country, Japan could get involved in U.S.-led wars even though Japan is not the country being attacked. The second point is international cooperation. Japan could be compelled to dispatch its troops to war in the name of international cooperation. From these 2 points, you can clearly see that the defense of the country is not the aim of a national defense. To reiterate, the current self-defense force already remedies the concern on defending the country. Beyond this, the national defense proposal clearly aims to fulfill other interests. During the last election, Prime Minister Abe stated that the Japanese self-defense force is viewed as an armed force abroad. Therefore, it is just fitting that they also be recognized as such within Japan. He said that this is just a simple matter of changing the label from self-defense force into armed forces. However, this is a lie, for what he really plans is the formal creation of an armed forces. Our self-defense force is not allowed to perform military powers abroad. They are denied of the right to belligerency. If we go back to what is stated in the Article 9, Paragraph 2 of the Constitution, it is clear that Japan does not recognize its right to belligerency. What does this mean? It means that Japan gives up the right to go into battle with another country. The right to belligerency means the recognized rights of the warring nations as defined by international laws. To put this simply, this means the killing of enemy soldiers, destruction of their military force, capture of enemy ships, and the creation of an occupation policy, among others. But the most important point to remember is that the right to belligerency allows the killing of enemy soldiers. This is recognized by armed forces. However, the current Japanese constitution does not allow this. The Japanese self-defense force is not allowed to kill enemy soldiers when they are abroad. It is only in exceptional cases, such as self-defense, in order to preserve one's life, that the necessity to kill is recognized. The Japanese self-defense force is prohibited to kill in the performance of their duties abroad. Only under pressing situations in order to preserve one's life can it be considered. In contrast, if there's a change and the self-defense force officially becomes the national armed force, then they could perform the right to belligerency when at war abroad. However, they are not allowed to kill civilians or prisoners. This is the difference between our current self-defense force and a typical armed force. The former is not allowed to kill while the latter could. That is why the shift from being a self-defense force into a national armed force is not a simple issue of changing labels. The National Armed Force does not really aim to defend the country from attacks. Rather, it will be an excuse to join in wars led by ally countries of Japan, or wars initiated in the name of international cooperation. to become a common country like the US, Great Britain, and Germany. But are both the US and Great Britain typical countries? If we recall the Boston Marathon incident, a terrifying incident happened. What is happening now is that the enemies of these countries are targeting them. They become targets of terrorism. We will become a typical country who lives in fear every day of terrorism. Is it good to become such a country? Is it good for our children and grandchildren to have such a constitution? To be a different Japan? My opinion is that it is not good. In the proposed constitutional revision by the LDP, the renunciation of war is inserted in the Article 9, Paragraph 1. The LDP members and Prime Minister Abe frequently says this also in their statements. They tell everyone to be at ease because they included a peace clause in their revision. But even though it says so in the first paragraph, the second paragraph states that the renunciation of war as an exercise of the right of the state does not impede with its right to perform self-defense duties. At the same time, the clause that denies the right to belligerency is visibly omitted. What this means is that we will become a country that can unleash its military power under the name of self-defense or international cooperation. The proposal to revise the Constitution is clearly not for the aim of defense. If the LDP proposed revision is implemented, our lives could be greatly affected. We as a people could regretfully turn into a formation with the aim of killing. Second is that in all things, military affairs could be prioritized. If a citizen does not cooperate, they can be tagged as unpatriotic or as a coward by his or her fellows, thus causing conflict between people. Also, applicants in the armed forces could be low. If this happens, it will again cause the acceptance of young people in the military. The conscription system could be enforced. They might claim that they will not implement the conscription system, but this is still a possibility. Another thing is that the budget allocation for military affairs will increase, which could mean a tax hike or the reduction of allocation for Social Security. Also, the maintenance of nuclear potential is a possibility. In addition, depending on the ban of export of weapons, Japanese people will become merchants of death. Let us not let this happen. If the LDP revisions pushes on it, will be a backward leap into the Meiji Constitution era. Let us compare the pre-war constitution with the post-war one. In the pre-war constitution, it was a sovereignty of the emperor, while in the post-war, it became the people's sovereignty. From a nation that wages war into a nation that renounces war. Before, the imperial rescript on education was implemented. Now it is not. From a country that uses the Yasukuni shrine into a country that recognizes the separation of the church and the state. From a country that implemented centralization of power into a country that ensures the autonomy of local government. From a country that discriminates differently abled people, women, and children into a country without discrimination. From a country that prioritizes the aristocracy and the great landowners into one that aims to narrow the gaps. From a country that forces responsibility into its citizens into a country that implements welfare. From being citizens living for the country into a country for its citizens. In a nutshell, from being a country that values the emperor, it became a country that values its people. This is the post-war regime. The post-war regime is not a return on the actions of the pre-war days. Now, the current Japanese constitution has two merits. First, it is the constitutionalism that favors respect of individuals. This is human wisdom. Next, it is nonviolence and pacifism. This is advancement for Japan. We are the same with other countries and we have differences as well. These two merits are negated in the proposed constitutional revision by the LDP. First, the LDP proposal departs from the notion of respecting individuals. This is a parting from human wisdom. Also, in order to strengthen the allegiance with the U.S., it departs from the ideals of pacifism and nonviolence. This is a backward move for Japan. In a gist, the LDP proposal has these four characteristics, from a constitutionalism to a non-constitutionalism, becoming a country that could wage wars, becoming a country with the sovereignty of the emperor and the withdrawal of democratic sovereignty and turning its back from rights and expanding the duties of the citizens. The Abe administration has the intention of first changing Article 96. This change means that a majority vote will suffice instead of their current ruling that needs the approval of 2/3 of parliament members. What will happen if you soften the requirements of Article 96? First, they say that because of the strict restrictions, it will be difficult to change the Constitution. This is not true. Countries with more strict provisions on revising their constitution, like the US and Switzerland, have managed to have revisions in their constitutions. The real reason why Japan has not yet changed its constitution is because there's no public desire to revise it. Next, let us not forget that their real intention is to revise Article 9. This is very crafty politics. PM Abe has said this: if 1/3 of the parliament members opposes, then the citizens will not be allowed to participate. We want to start by taking back the Constitution into the hands of the citizens. In reality, the final vote is decided by national referendum. However, there is the danger of manipulation of information that can affect the decision-making during the referendum. If this happens, this could lead to irreparable outcomes. So, in recognition of human error, an impartial judgment by the parliament is conducted. What does the 2/3 vote requirement mean? It means that in order to achieve a vote of 2/3, yes votes from opposition members of the parliament will also be needed. It is after impassioned debates between the ruling party and the opposition party where agreement from the opposition party is received will be the motion pushed forth. If only the majority vote is required, then there's a dangerous possibility that proposals could be railroaded in favor of the ruling party. The easing of the requirements could mean that the people bound by the Constitution could have more freedom if they desire. The hurdles they must go over will be lowered. This is against the ideal of constitutionalism. Also, by leaving the decision to just the majority, constitutional changes could be made as the ruling party desires. This should not be permitted. Now, as we think about these proposed revisions on the Japanese Constitution, we must once again understand the following. First, we must ask for what purpose does the Constitution exist for. Next, we must think about who and which parties will benefit the change in the Constitution. Third, we must consider if our lives will really be better if the Constitution is changed. Fourth, we must consider if our lives will be more secure, if we will have more freedoms, or if welfare will be more enhanced after the revision. Fifth, we must be careful not to be too optimistic and still consider realistic scenarios. To prevent our Constitution from turning to worse, the ability to imagine is very important. We must realize that power could be dangerous. We must understand the misery of war. We must imagine how our lives will be changed by the constitutional revisions. We must share these imaginations. The people's solidarity is really powerful. We must have confidence in the power of citizen solidarity. Right now, I am currently engaged in the one-person, one-vote advocacy. And it is strange that the examination board members themselves, who are reviewing the constitutionality of the current voting system, are elected under the same unconstitutional system. Even the Diet itself has no democratic legitimacy. Thus, proposed provisions from Diet members elected through an unconstitutional process should not be permitted. Now, we have discussed a lot today, but let us go back to the question of, for what purpose does the Constitution exist? It is for our rights and our freedoms that the Constitution exists. The Constitution differs from a law. The Constitution restrains the powers of the state, but in contrast, the LDP proposal serves as a tool to limit the rights and freedoms of the people. The long-held pacifism valued by our country will be gone, and we will become a typical war-waging country. We need to put into action our imagination and understand what being a typical country that can wage wars mean. If we become such a country, terrorist threats are a possibility. But what if we are attacked? What if they claim the Senkaku Islands? How can we defend our country from North Korea? For all of these concerns, you can answer that we already have a self-defense force for that. It is for reasons beyond defense of the country that a national defense is being proposed. Going back to the ideal of unarmed nationality, we realize that the current self-defense system already remedies such concerns. Finally, this is what I expect from everyone. I expect everyone's understanding that the future is made by us today. In order to avoid giving the next generation a terrible future, we must perform our responsibilities now in understanding the Constitution. Festina lente, a Latin phrase which means make haste slowly, this means not to be impatient, not be in hurry, and to never give up. Surely we must continue to strengthen our collective power, for with our solidarity we can have the power to prevent these unacceptable revisions in the Constitution. If we do it, then we cannot fail. We must never fail to defend the values protected by our Constitution. Let us protect the values in our Constitution. Thank you for listening throughout my talk. From this day, let us start working together. Thank you very much.